every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The air in the Bahamas is thick with salt and money. In the exclusive Albany resort, a $30 million penthouse served as the nerve center of a new kind of empire. It was a place of paradox, a fusion of corporate power and post-adolescent chaos. Here, amidst discarded Amazon packages and half-eaten vegan meals, a small group of brilliant, socially awkward millennials were rewriting the rules of finance. At their center was the king, a figure who seemed almost allergic to the trappings of royalty. Sam Bankman-Fried, with his mop of untamable hair, his uniform of a t-shirt and cargo shorts, and his habit of sleeping on a beanbag chair in the office, was the antithesis of a Wall Street titan. He was the friendly face of crypto, a mathematical savant who spoke not of profits, but of purpose. He was a practitioner of a philosophy called effective altruism, a worldview that posited the best way to do good was to accumulate staggering wealth and then give it all away in the most efficient manner possible. He wasn't building his company, FTX, for himself. He was building it for humanity. He graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, shared stages with presidents and prime ministers, and pledged to spend $1 billion to prevent the next pandemic. He was hailed as the new J.P. Morgan, a savior who would stabilize a volatile industry, and billions of dollars poured into his kingdom, from sophisticated venture capitalists to ordinary people who saw in FTX a safe and trustworthy gateway to the future of money. They believed in the mission. They believed in the math. Most of all, they believed in him. Then, in the space of 1 week in November of 2022, the kingdom crumbled into dust. The $30 billion valuation vanished. The celebrity endorsements became a source of burning shame, and the money, more than $8 billion of customer money, was simply gone. It hadn't been lost in a series of unlucky trades. It had been taken. The philosopher-king was revealed to be a common thief, his penthouse a crime scene, and his altruistic philosophy the most elaborate costume a fraudster had ever worn. The story of Sam Bankman-Fried is not just about the collapse of a company. It is a story about the seductive power of a narrative. It is about how easily we can be blinded by the performance of virtue. Today, we dissect the anatomy of deception, the calculated construction of a benevolent myth designed to conceal one of the most audacious financial crimes of the 21st century. Samuel Benjamin Bankman-Fried was born into a world of intellectual rigor and progressive ideals. His parents, Joseph Bankman and Barbara Fried, were both celebrated law professors at Stanford University, pillars of an academic elite. He grew up on the university campus, a place where complex ideas were the currency of daily life. From a young age, he was immersed in conversations about utilitarianism, ethics, and law. He was, by all accounts, preternaturally gifted with numbers, seeing the world as a series of probabilities and expected value calculations. This quantitative lens would come to define his entire worldview. After excelling at a small private high school, he enrolled at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the logical destination for a mind like his, graduating with a degree in physics. It was during his time at MIT that he was introduced to the philosophy that would become his public calling card, effective altruism. Popularized by thinkers like William McCaskill, the movement posed a compelling question to its adherents. How can one use their resources to do the most possible good in the world? It was a data-driven approach to philanthropy, one that appealed deeply to the quantitative optimization-obsessed mindset prevalent in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street. For many, This meant dedicating their lives to working for charities or in public health, but for a select few, it meant embracing a more radical path known as earning to give. The logic was simple. A brilliant quantitative trader could likely generate far more money working for a hedge fund and then donating those earnings than they could working for a nonprofit. It was a moral justification for the pursuit of extreme wealth. Sam Bankman-Fried didn't just embrace this idea, he became its poster child. After graduating from MIT, he took a job at Jane Street Capital, a secretive and prestigious quantitative trading firm. It was the perfect environment for him. Jane Street was a pure meritocracy of the mind, where traders built complex algorithms to find and exploit tiny inefficiencies in global markets. He was good at it, very good. He learned the intricate mechanics of arbitrage, the art of making risk-free profit by buying an asset in one market and simultaneously selling it in another for a slightly higher price. He was living the first part of the earning to give playbook, making a very comfortable living. But the crypto boom of 2017 presented an opportunity that was orders of magnitude larger. A market so new, so inefficient, and so global that the arbitrage opportunities were not mere pennies, but millions. He saw his chance to accelerate the mission, to earn not just to give, but to earn on a scale that could reshape the world. In 2017, Bankman-Fried left Jane Street and, with a small group of colleagues and friends, founded Alameda Research. The name was intentionally innocuous, chosen to avoid raising red flags with banks who were still deeply skeptical of cryptocurrency. Alameda was a quantitative trading firm, a hedge fund, built to do in crypto what Jane Street did in traditional markets. Its first major success came from the kimchi premium, an arbitrage trade that exploited the price difference of Bitcoin between American and South Korean exchanges. For a brief period, Bitcoin was trading for significantly more in Korea, and if a firm could figure out the logistical nightmare of moving money in and out of the country quickly, it could print money. Alameda figured it out. They were making, at times, $1 million a day. But this early success masked a culture of extreme risk-taking. Alameda wasn't just doing simple arbitrage. It was making huge, leveraged bets on the direction of various cryptocurrencies. Former employees would later describe a chaotic environment where risk management was an afterthought. Hundreds of millions of dollars were moved around with little oversight. Bankman-Fried, while brilliant at identifying trading opportunities, was reportedly cavalier about the back-end operations, the boring but essential work of accounting and risk controls. Alameda was a high-wire act from the very beginning, a place where staggering profits were punctuated by moments of near-catastrophic loss. This appetite for risk, this disregard for guardrails, was not a bug in the system, it was a feature. It was a direct reflection of its founder's personality, and it was the fatal flaw that would eventually bring his entire empire crashing down. While Alameda Research was a formidable trading operation, it was a B2B business, largely unknown to the general public. Sam Bankman-Fried's ambition was far greater than running a successful hedge fund. He saw a much larger opportunity in the retail side of crypto. In 2019, he co-founded FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange. The pitch was simple and compelling. Built by traders for traders. At the time, existing crypto exchanges were often clunky, unreliable, and prone to crashing during periods of high volatility. FTX promised a superior product. It offered a vast array of sophisticated trading instruments, including derivatives and tokenized stocks, that appealed to serious traders. The platform was fast, the user interface was clean, and it worked. The growth was explosive. FTX quickly distinguished itself from competitors like Coinbase and Binance. It wasn't just a place to buy and sell Bitcoin, it was a complex financial ecosystem. One of its key innovations was FTT, the FTX token. This was a cryptocurrency created by the exchange itself. Holding FTT gave users benefits, like lower trading fees, but it also served a much more crucial and ultimately insidious purpose for Bankman-Fried. The exchange held a massive supply of its own token, which it could list on its own balance sheet as an asset. It was like a bank printing its own money and then counting that money as part of its capital reserves. As long as people believed FTT had value, the illusion of financial strength could be maintained. With FTX's meteoric rise, Bankman-Fried began to meticulously craft his public image. He understood that in the world of crypto, where trust is paramount and regulation is minimal, narrative is everything. He didn't want to be seen as just another greedy financier. He needed to be seen as something more, something better. He cultivated the persona of the eccentric, benevolent genius. The messy hair, the cargo shorts, the Toyota Corolla, it was all part of a deliberate performance. It was a costume designed to signal that he was different, that he was above the superficial concerns of wealth and status. He gave interviews while playing video games, projecting an image of casual brilliance, of a mind so powerful it could manage a multi-billion-dollar company as a side task. This persona was amplified by a relentless and incredibly expensive marketing campaign. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars to embed the FTX name into the cultural consciousness. He bought the naming rights to the Miami Heat's basketball arena. He signed endorsement deals with sports icons like Tom Brady, Gisele Bündchen, Stephen Curry, and Naomi Osaka. He hired comedian Larry David for a Super Bowl commercial that cynically encouraged viewers not to miss out on the next big thing. The message was clear. FTX wasn't some shady fly-by-night operation. It was safe, it was mainstream, and it was endorsed by people you knew and trusted. He became a fixture in Washington, D.C., testifying before Congress and becoming one of the largest political donors in the country, carefully giving to both Democrats and Republicans. He positioned himself as a thought leader, a responsible statesman for the crypto industry who could help lawmakers craft sensible regulation. It was a masterful performance. He was selling a story of safety, vision, and altruism, and the world bought it, completely. Behind the carefully constructed facade of the altruistic visionary, a different reality was taking shape within the walls of the Albany penthouse in the Bahamas. This was the true seat of power, an insular world inhabited by Bankman-Fried's inner circle. The key figures were Gary Wang, the co-founder and chief technology officer of FTX, Nishad Singh, the director of engineering, and Caroline Ellison, the CEO of Alameda Research and Bankman-Fried's on-again, off-again romantic partner. They were all incredibly bright, all in their 20s, and all bound together by a complex web of professional ambition, personal loyalty, and a shared life in the luxurious but isolated Bahamian enclave. Gary Wang was the quiet coder, the technical genius who had been with Bankman-Fried since the beginning. A fellow MIT graduate, he was responsible for building the very architecture of the FTX exchange. Nishad Singh, a friend of Bankman-Fried's younger brother, was a talented software engineer who quickly rose through the ranks to become a trusted lieutenant, overseeing critical parts of the company's infrastructure. And then there was Caroline Ellison, a Stanford graduate with a degree in mathematics. She had worked with Bankman-Fried at Jane Street before joining him at Alameda. Her personal diaries, later revealed at trial, would paint a portrait of a brilliant but deeply insecure young woman. constantly stressed by the pressures of her job and her tumultuous relationship with her boss. This small group held the keys to the kingdom. They lived together, worked together, and socialized together, creating an environment where the lines between personal and professional blurred into non-existence. It was this insularity that allowed the fraud to begin and to fester. The mechanism of the crime, when stripped of its technical jargon, was shockingly simple. It was a backdoor, a secret feature in the code of the FTX exchange. At trial, Gary Wang would testify that in the summer of 2019, at the specific direction of Sam Bankman-Fried, he wrote a few lines of computer code that would prove to be the company's undoing. This code contained a feature he called allow_negative. On a normal exchange, if a user's account balance hits zero, they can no longer trade or withdraw funds. Their account is automatically liquidated to cover their losses. This is a fundamental rule of financial risk management. The allow_negative feature created a secret exception to this rule, but only for one specific account, an account belonging to Alameda Research. This meant that Alameda could withdraw funds from FTX even if it didn't have the money. It could lose billions of dollars on trades, and its positions would never be liquidated. It was granted a virtually unlimited line of credit, a bottomless pit of cash that it could draw from at any time with no oversight and no consequences. The source of that cash was not FTX's own money. It was the money deposited by the exchange's millions of customers. When a person in Ohio or Japan or Brazil deposited $1,000 onto FTX to buy Bitcoin, they believed their money was being held securely in their account. But in reality, their funds were being commingled in a giant pool. And through this secret software backdoor, Alameda Research was plunging a fire hose into that pool and siphoning billions of dollars for its own use. This wasn't a sophisticated financial maneuver. It was theft on a colossal scale, hidden by a thin veneer of computer code. Bankman-Fried would later try to claim it was a simple accounting oversight, a glitch in the system. But the testimony of his closest confederate, Gary Wang, made the truth undeniable. It wasn't a bug. It was a feature built for the express purpose of allowing Alameda to take customer money. The $8 billion that flowed from FTX customer accounts into Alameda's coffers was not used cautiously. It was fuel for a bonfire of hubris. The money was deployed across a dizzying array of ventures, each riskier and more extravagant than the last. A significant portion was used by Alameda to make massive, highly leveraged bets on volatile cryptocurrencies. When these bets paid off, the profits were Alameda's. When they soured, the losses were quietly absorbed by the ever-growing liability to FTX's customers. This secret line of credit allowed Alameda to operate without the normal constraints of risk that govern every other financial institution on the planet. Another enormous chunk of the money, over $5 billion, was funneled into a venture capital arm called FTX Ventures. Bankman-Fried styled himself as a New Age Warren Buffett, a visionary investor backing the next generation of tech companies. He plowed hundreds of millions into high-profile startups, including Anthropic, an artificial intelligence company. These weren't liquid investments. They were long-term bets that locked up capital for years. It was money he could not possibly return to his customers on short notice, but this fact seemed to be of little concern. The goal was to build an empire, and customer funds were simply the raw material for its construction. The spending wasn't limited to digital assets and venture deals. It spilled lavishly into the physical world. Over $300 million was spent on luxury real estate in the Bahamas. This included the $30 million penthouse at the Albany Resort that served as the Inner Circle's headquarters, as well as vacation homes and condos for employees and even Bankman-Fried's parents. The scale of the personal enrichment was breathtaking. Nishad Singh, the director of engineering, received over $500 million in loans from Alameda, which he used to buy a multi-million-dollar home and donate to his preferred charitable causes. Bankman-Fried himself took out a $1 billion personal loan from the company. This was money that belonged to his customers. Perhaps the most cynical use of the stolen funds was in the political arena. Bankman-Fried became a behemoth of political fundraising, donating over $40 million in the 2022 midterm election cycle alone. He primarily supported Democratic candidates and causes, becoming the party's second-largest individual donor. He cultivated an image as a progressive force, championing issues like pandemic preparedness. However, testimony from his inner circle, particularly Nishad Singh, revealed a more Machiavellian strategy. While Bankman-Fried donated publicly to Democrats, he funneled millions more in dark money through Singh and another executive to support Republicans. The goal was not ideological purity, it was influence. He was buying access and goodwill on both sides of the aisle, hoping to shape crypto regulation in his favor and preemptively neutralize any potential political threats to his growing empire. The altruistic mission he so loudly proclaimed was, in reality, a cover for a calculated campaign to capture the political system using his customers' life savings as his war chest. The spending spree was a testament to a profound sense of impunity. In Sam Bankman-Fried's world, there were no rules, no limits, and no consequences. The money would never run out because the back door was always open. For a time, the illusion held. The crypto market was booming in 2021, and the rising tide lifted all boats, masking the rot at the core of FTX. But even in the good times, there were whispers. Rival executives and skeptical industry observers pointed to the inherent conflict of interest in an exchange owner, also running a massive proprietary trading firm that traded on that same exchange. They questioned the astronomical valuation of the FTT token, recognizing that its worth was based on little more than faith in FTX itself. But these concerns were largely dismissed. Bankman-Fried's public relations machine was too powerful, his persona too convincing. He was the smart one, the man who understood the future. To doubt him was to reveal your own ignorance. The first serious cracks appeared in the spring and summer of 2022. A major crypto crash, triggered by the collapse of the Terra Luna ecosystem, sent shockwaves through the industry. Several major crypto lenders and hedge funds, like Celsius and Three Arrows Capital, went bankrupt. In the midst of this chaos, Bankman-Fried stepped forward to play the role of savior. He extended lines of credit and orchestrated bailouts for struggling firms, earning comparisons to J.P. Morgan's role in the Panic of 1907. The media lauded him as the lender of last resort, the only adult in the room. In reality, this was a desperate act of self-preservation. Alameda had significant exposure to the failing crypto assets, and by bailing out the system, he was really bailing himself out, using yet more customer money to plug the holes in his own leaking ship. The savior narrative was just another layer of deception. The final act began on November 2, 2022. The crypto news outlet CoinDesk published a bombshell report that sent a tremor of fear through the market. Reporter Ian Allison had obtained a copy of Alameda Research's balance sheet. What it revealed was stunning. Of Alameda's $14.6 billion in assets, the largest single entry, nearly $6 billion worth, was FTT. the token created by its sister company, FTX. The balance sheet was a house of cards. Alameda's financial health was not based on diverse liquid assets, but was instead propped up by a massive, illiquid holding of a token that its own founder controlled. It was a classic feedback loop of self-created value. The revelation confirmed the worst fears of skeptics. The Bankman-Fried empire had no real foundation. The CoinDesk article was the spark. The inferno was ignited 4 days later, on November 6, by a single tweet. Changpeng Zhao, the founder and CEO of Binance, FTX's largest rival, announced that his company would be liquidating its entire position in FTT tokens, a holding worth over $500 million. Zhao, known in the industry as CZ, cited the recent revelations as the reason. The tweet was a public declaration of no confidence from the biggest player in the market. It was a signal to everyone that the king had no clothes. Panic erupted. FTT holders rushed for the exits, trying to sell their tokens before the price collapsed. The value of FTT began to plummet, wiping out the paper value on Alameda's balance sheet. Simultaneously, a far more dangerous phenomenon was taking hold: a digital bank run. Spooked by the news and the plunging FTT price, FTX customers around the globe rushed to withdraw their funds. They logged into the app, hit the withdraw button, and expected their money to be there. For a while it was. FTX processed billions of dollars in withdrawals over the next 72 hours. But Bankman-Fried knew the truth. He knew there was a gaping $8 billion hole where their money was supposed to be. The funds had been given to Alameda, which had in turn squandered them on venture investments, Bahamian real estate, and bad trades. The money simply wasn't there. As the withdrawals mounted, Bankman-Fried grew increasingly desperate. In a series of now infamous tweets, he tried to reassure the public. FTX is fine. Assets are fine, he wrote on November 7th. He claimed the company had enough to cover all client holdings, and that it didn't invest client assets. Each of these statements was a bald-faced lie. Privately, he was scrambling. He called CZ and begged for a bailout. For a brief, surreal moment, it seemed to work. Binance announced it had signed a non-binding letter of intent to acquire FTX. But after a day of due diligence, of looking at the books and seeing the sheer scale of the financial black hole, Binance backed out. They released a statement saying, "The issues are beyond our control or ability to help." It was the final nail in the coffin. On November 11, 2022, less than 10 days after the CoinDesk article, Sam Bankman-Fried, the man who was supposed to save crypto, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. His $32 billion empire was worth less than zero. The deception was over. The collapse of FTX was not a typical corporate bankruptcy. It was, in the words of the man appointed to clean up the mess, a crime scene. John J. Ray III, a veteran insolvency lawyer best known for overseeing the liquidation of Enron, was named the new CEO of FTX. His first filing with the bankruptcy court was a document of pure shock and awe. Never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here, Ray wrote. He described a company run by a very small group of grossly inexperienced, unsophisticated, and potentially compromised individuals, where basic accounting practices were non-existent. Invoices were approved with personalized emojis. Corporate funds were used to buy houses for employees. There was no accurate list of who even worked for the company. It was chaos, controlled by a man who had sold the world a story of sophisticated genius. While Ray and his team began the Herculean task of entangling the financial wreckage and trying to locate missing assets, law enforcement was closing in. On December 12, 2022, at the request of the U.S. government, Sam Bankman-Fried was arrested by Bahamian authorities at his Albany penthouse. Just over a week later, he was extradited to the United States to face a litany of federal charges brought by the Southern District of New York, including wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. The architect of the grand deception was now a criminal defendant, swapping his cargo shorts for a suit in a Manhattan courtroom. The prosecution, led by U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, built a case that was elegant in its simplicity. They deliberately avoided getting bogged down in the complexities of cryptocurrency. This case, they argued, was not about arcane digital assets. It was about lying, cheating, and stealing. It was fraud, pure and simple. Their strategy relied on a powerful narrative, and even more importantly, on the testimony of the people who knew the truth, because they had been in the room where it happened. One by one, Bankman-Fried's closest confidants, the other residents of the Bahamas penthouse, turned against him. Gary Wong, Nishad Singh, and Caroline Ellison all pleaded guilty to their own roles in the fraud and agreed to cooperate with the government, testifying against their former boss in exchange for leniency. Their testimony was devastating. Caroline Ellison, the former Alameda CEO, took the stand and told the jury in a clear, steady voice that they had stolen billions of dollars from FTX customers, and that they had done so at the direction of Sam Bankman-Fried. She described how he had set up the systems that allowed Alameda to take the money, and how he had ordered her to create false balance sheets to deceive lenders. Gary Wong, the CTO, calmly explained the allow_negative code feature, confirming that he had built the secret backdoor on Bankman-Fried's orders. Nishad Singh delivered perhaps the most emotional testimony, breaking down as he described his guilt and shame over his role, particularly in the straw donor scheme to funnel customer money into the political system. Together, their accounts painted an undeniable picture of a conspiracy with one man at its center, a man who knew exactly what he was doing every step of the way. Faced with this mountain of evidence and the unified testimony of his inner circle, Bankman-Fried's defense team was left with a difficult task. Their strategy was to portray their client not as a criminal mastermind, but as a well-meaning but overwhelmed math nerd. They argued he had acted in good faith, that he had never intended to defraud anyone. He was, in their telling, a visionary startup founder who had been swamped by the company's explosive growth, a victim of poor management and a chaotic market, not a criminal. They attempted to shift the blame, painting Caroline Ellison as a scorned lover and a poor manager who was responsible for Alameda's risky trades. It was a narrative of incompetence, not intent. The strategy culminated in a high-stakes gamble, putting Sam Bankman-Fried himself on the witness stand. It proved to be a catastrophic error. Under direct examination from his own lawyer, he was meandering and professorial, attempting to lecture the jury on the nuances of risk management, but under cross-examination by Assistant U.S. Attorney Danielle Sassoon, his composure crumbled. He was evasive, argumentative, and petulant. He claimed not to recall key events and conversations. When confronted with his own public statements and internal documents, he equivocated and split hairs. Over several days of grueling testimony, the jury saw not a misunderstood genius, but a man who refused to take responsibility for anything. The carefully constructed persona he had spent years and billions of dollars building was systematically dismantled, not by the prosecution, but by his own words. The performance had finally failed him. The jury's deliberation was remarkably swift. After a month-long trial filled with complex financial testimony, it took them less than 5 hours to reach a unanimous decision. On November 2, 2023, exactly 1 year after the CoinDesk article that started it all, Sam Bankman-Fried was found guilty on all 7 counts of fraud and conspiracy. The math nerd defense had failed. The jury saw the case for what the prosecution had always said it was: a simple, massive theft. Several months later, on March 28, 2024, he appeared for sentencing. The prosecution asked for a sentence of 40 to 50 years, arguing that the crime was one of historic proportions, a brazen fraud that demanded severe punishment to deter others. They pointed to his complete lack of remorse, his attempts to tamper with witnesses, and the immense harm he had caused to hundreds of thousands of victims around the world. The defense pleaded for a much lighter sentence of just over 6 years, submitting letters from family and friends attesting to his good character and arguing that he was not a malicious predator, but a flawed individual with autism who made terrible mistakes. In the end, Judge Lewis Kaplan delivered a sentence that split the difference, but left no doubt as to his view of the defendant. He sentenced Sam Bankman-Fried to 25 years in federal prison. Before handing down the sentence, Judge Kaplan methodically dismantled the defense's narrative. He stated that Bankman-Fried's claim of acting altruistically was, in his words, largely an act. He noted his exceptional flexibility with the truth and his apparent lack of any remorse. He concluded that there was a significant risk that if Bankman-Fried were ever released, he would be in a position to do something very bad again. The philosopher-king was now a convicted felon, his empire in ruins, and his life forfeit to the consequences of his own choices. In dissecting the anatomy of this case, we return to the central theme of deception. The crime itself, the siphoning of customer funds through a software backdoor, was a product of the digital age, but the method of its concealment was as old as time. It was a confidence game. Sam Bankman-Fried's greatest creation was not FTX, nor was it Alameda. It was the character he played for the public. The character of the awkward, brilliant, altruistic nerd who was too busy thinking about saving the world to care about money was the ultimate tool of the fraud. This persona was a shield. It disarmed the most sophisticated venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, who poured billions into his companies with shockingly little due diligence. It enchanted the media, who eagerly printed hagiographies of the new boy wonder of finance. It seduced politicians, who saw his donations as a sign of a new, more enlightened form of capitalism. And most tragically, it fooled ordinary people, who entrusted him with their savings because they believed in the story he told. The shorts, the messy hair, the beanbag, it was all a costume. It was a deliberate, calculated performance designed to make people lower their guard, to make them believe he wasn't like the others. The collapse of FTX serves as a brutal lesson in the power of narrative and the danger of substituting a compelling story for rigorous scrutiny. It reveals how an entire ecosystem of investors, journalists, and politicians can become willing participants in a collective delusion when the myth is appealing enough. Sam Bankman-Fried did not just exploit a flaw in his software's code. He exploited a flaw in human psychology, our desire to believe in saviors, our tendency to be blinded by the performance of virtue, and our willingness to trust in the stories people tell about themselves, especially when those stories are what we want to hear. The $8 billion he stole may one day be partially recovered and returned to his victims, but the trust he shattered is a far greater liability. He proved that in an age of digital abstraction, where money is just a string of code and reputations can be manufactured on social media, the oldest crimes can find new and devastating expression. The anatomy of this deception was not written in algorithms, but in the careful construction of a lie so grand that for a time the entire world believed it was the truth. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.